Hello, everyone, and welcome to the most recent installment of Inside Design. This is the first one for 2023. And so I'm here with Laura. We're both fresh back from holidays. Hopefully this will be a really interesting and exciting insight into Laura and her design practice. And, we'll get to know her a lot more. So let's kick it off by asking, what's your role at Atlassian? What do you do here day to day?
Well, you've pumped it right up now that this has to be really interesting and really fascinating. So let's see how we go. So my role at Atlassian, I support the really amazing team in data experiences, who we all may know as the team that looks after the Atlassian Analytics product experience that's coming to market this year. But our team also looks at platformizing data and analytics experiences so that we can start to bring more coherence and consistency across those experiences in the Atlassian family.
And I remember interviewing you for the role. So how long have you been at Atlassian for?
I could not hear you. Go again.
Oh,
wait, take two.
Take two. And I remember interviewing you for the role. So how long ago was that? How long have you been here at Atlassian?
I think that was a year and 10 months ago. So it's almost been 2 years, but not quite.
Yeah, well, I would have pegged it for longer than that. So I'm glad you know.
It feels like longer. It feels like, 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
But it also feels like it could still be in the first 6 months. I think Atlassian has that effect.
So moving on with questions, we'll do some icebreakers to start. What do you do for fun or to relax?
I have a lot of very strange and sporadic hobbies that I pick up and put down for years at a time. At the moment, I spend a lot of my spare time renovating my house, which is a 1955 beauty up top, which needs a bit of work. And on the bottom level is a 1990s cringe fest. So it has been renovated before in the 90s, and it's quite funny. You go up the stairs and it's like a different house. So we're trying to sort of bring that together a little bit. I think renovating is really fun because there's a lot of parallels between design and product as well, and working with what you have and working with the constraints and learning all the tools, working with your hands. It's challenging and fulfilling. It's not relaxing. 90% of the time, it's very stressful and things don't work. But when it does work and when it does come together, it's very nice and very fulfilling. The other thing I love to do other than renovating, I'll spend a bunch of time on the Peloton as well. So pedaling my worries away to something like the Hamilton soundtrack. That's what I do a lot of days when I finish work.
Amazing. And I didn't know you were renovating. What's your favorite tool of trade? Is it the hammer? Is it the nail gun, circular saw?
I really like the circular saw, actually. But it's highly intimidating as a tool, and you can just cut your entire hand off. I found it amazing that they just sell that and you can walk in and buy it without even an ID or anything. But I also really love probably the jigsaw, because you can be a little bit more precise. Or a really, really good electric screwdriver. Nice. For all that IKEA assembly that you do once you finish renovating a room.
Amazing. Well, if you like a circular saw, let me know once you've had a go of a petrol-powered concrete saw. Those are next level.
I have a fear of some of those tools. I don't know that I will be using those.
So continuing on the icebreakers, how did you find your way into design, and why not architecture or interior design?
Oh, great question. If I look back far enough, I think as a child, I love animals. So I wanted to be a vet until someone told me that I'd need to put animals to sleep. And then I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to be a zoologist. because that's something you could do that also involved animals, but we don't have that many zoology programs in Australia. And if I look back far enough, there's like all these little hallmarks throughout my really, really young life and young childhood of the indicators of a designer in the making. Like, I think I was 7 years old and I made a set of fake business cards, like one set for myself and one set for my dog. And I don't know what I thought I'd use them for. But I was sort of designing things and making things and stuff all the time as early as I can remember. And then making my way into design professionally, I kind of stumbled, like a lot of people do, into I think an agency role, and started doing some web development and some software engineering. And then that shifted further and further into design, user experience. And then some of my last few roles have actually been more product management focused. So coming to Atlassian, it's actually like coming back to design for me a little bit as well, which has been really nice.
Awesome. And so that's a bit of a journey, over a number of years. And, I'm going to, I think, accurately assume that through that you've seen lots of changes in the design industry. You've seen a lot of different things that are great, not so great. And through all those experiences, have you developed a set of maybe design heroes that you're, think that just do great work and you'd like to either emulate, their approach or the great work that they've done?
Oh, I mean, I'm going. Wait.
You have frozen, but I can hear you.
Aha! And we're back?
We're back.
Okay, we're back. Cool. All right. So
maybe just in case the recording futzed out as well, let me ask the question again so they've got something that they can, edit together.
Something to work with.
And I'm trying to sort of keep the conversation going, right? So I'm kind of slightly tweaking the questions as we go.
Oh,
based on what you've said.
You're like a news anchor. This is great. it's like you're a journalist in your past life.
What was I saying?
Journey.
So, across your career, you've gone through different phases and different types of work. And I was wondering if through those different experiences, whether you've developed or collected maybe even a set of design heroes that you either sort of really look up to or want to emulate their approach or even their sort of, the types of work that they do.
Really great question. I think I've never had a really consistent set of design heroes. I think they've evolved, maybe because as I've sort of gone through my career, I've really had an evolutionary approach to many of my roles as well. Usually I wouldn't look at the traditional heroes, but I'd be working with some really talented designers who I'd really look up to and would really, really admire throughout that time as well. But there are a few names that come to mind, probably just sprinkled throughout the years. I used to read a lot of Luke Wroblewski's work in forms and things like that when I was working in e-commerce. There's a really excellent, I think ex-Facebook head of design, Julie Zhu, who writes some really great stuff around design and product. And she's just written for years. I remember reading her work. But yeah, I think your heroes kind of change as well, which I think is a really natural evolution. So I think at the moment, all of my heroes are local. They're all at Atlassian doing some pretty cool work. So
that's actually, I was going to go off script and ask you a question. Have you met any of your heroes, and have they lived up to the expectation?
Actually, I have met some of my heroes. So
nice.
I went to Smashing Conference. It probably would have been 8 or 9 years ago now. And it was a designer who had worked on some really, really intricate design system work at Twitter. And she did this phenomenal talk around building advocacy within an organization for something that wasn't very popular, which as designers, I think we do all the time. So she did this really, really great talk, and I'd followed her on Twitter for a long time. And after the conference, we did this Instagram photo walk where we were all supposed to walk together and take photos along the Santa Monica Pier. And as you do at conferences, you run into people and you meet them all the time. And I was just talking to this person next to me for like a solid 15 minutes. And then they asked me whose talk was my favorite during the conference. And I was talking this person up, and then I realized it was her. And it was really uncomfortable because it was like that moment of like, hey, but that's me. So, you know, when you do meet your heroes, usually you embarrass yourself completely, but that's part of the enjoyment.
Yeah, for sure. And so you mentioned reading Julie Zhu's book and others. So are you a book reader or a podcast listener, or do you divide your love between the two?
I am not a podcast listener. I love listening to music. So if I get a chance to listen to anything, it's always going to be music. But I am an avid book reader. I wouldn't say that I sit down and sort of noodle on a book on a couch or anything like that. I usually prefer reference books or nonfiction books. But I do love books, usually about design, about product, or about business. So I'm not a big fiction reader at all, but I love books that sort of challenge your way of thinking in a certain area to really like reflect and change who you are before you read the book to who you are after.
And so do you have any favorites or over the years, or do you have a particular one that you're really focused on at the moment?
I've got a few favorites, and a few of them are going to be things that people have heard of or read before. Radical Candor by Kim Scott is really great and really challenges the way that you communicate with others. It's a really good one called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, which is all about building a business and watching it fail and building it up again and watching it fail again, and all the hard lessons that come along with it. One of my other favorites that I actually have on my desk at the moment, because I do reference it a lot, is The Messy Middle, which is Scott Belsky's book, who I think was one of the people who founded Behance. But it's a great book because you can turn to almost any page and it's just like a little nugget of wisdom on each page, with an associated story and sort of learning and finding. And it's not really something you would sit down and read. It's more something that you can flip through the pages and get an insight, if you have 2 or 3 minutes to read 2 pages, which suits my attention span very, very nicely.
Amazing. That looks good. And I love yellow. So I'm thinking I'm going to put that on my my list of the next book to get.
It's a good one. I often take photos of the pages if I find something particularly insightful, and I'll send them to people in Slack and whatnot.
Yeah, right.
Because I think it's really consumable, and I think that's a really important thing if you're trying to translate knowledge, to really capture those short, sharp pieces, to sort of influence how much you can teach someone else, instead of saying, hey, read this entire novel.
Yeah. And maybe we could find 1 or 2 of those photos that you've taken, and we'll include them on the page when we publish the interview.
I love it. I will find my favorite page.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about design influence and you know, design career and evolving your thinking around design. But what about insight in? Can I take a take 2 on that one? Because I stumbled over my own tongue. Note to editor, ignore that first bit. I'm going to start again. So we've talked a bit about, you know, design influences and learning about design and evolving your career. What about outside of design? What influences you outside of design?
Oh, I mean, what isn't design? Like,
I'm the one asking the questions.
Design's
thanks.
really everywhere in my life in one form or another. So mine are too existential. Outside product design, that's still design related. You touched on it earlier, but architecture, interior design are very interesting to me, and super interesting fields that have very, very long and interesting histories, where they go through interesting trends and interesting sort of resurgences as well. I also find business and economics really interesting, and I never thought that I'd say that. But I think economics is a very fascinating machine and system of systems that operates in a certain way, and is again sort of having a lot of parallels, or a lot in common with design, and how design, the system of design, really works. So yeah, really some really design related things, but also some really boring things that have become more interesting to me as I've gotten older.
Yeah, it's crazy how you can, change, and the person that left uni and was interested in, certain things, or left school, is totally different when you, get a little bit older. So moving on to kind of a category of questions, where sort of looking back on your time at Atlassian, across the last 2 years, let's call it 2 years, what's your fondest memory or fondest experience of being at Atlassian?
I mean, will you be offended if it's not our interview?
Look, I'm going to assume that that's number one, and that would be boring for the audience. So let's move on to number two, when we can talk about that one.
That's okay, yeah. I would say more generally, the people. So my fondest experiences have been around the people at Atlassian, and just the community that's here, and some of the exceptional professionals I get to work with. It's really hard to nail it down to a single event or a single experience, but I think the theme would be the people that are here and the people I get to interact with every day, and sort of the aggregation of that, and how much we sort of support each other and grow each other as a community in design. That's been my fondest collection of experiences.
Awesome. And that's great. Good work, everyone. Keep doing it. And again, take two. Don't fucking know what I went to start talking and then didn't know what on earth I was going to say. Sometimes it works and the brain just fills in the gaps.
Fills in the blanks. I know, and other times it's dead. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, sometimes you're connected to the big universal brain in the sky, and it tells you what to do, and sometimes you're not. So a bit of a change of pace, but hopefully, keeping it focused on growth and support and moving forward. What's the most impactful piece of feedback that you've received from someone?
I feel like feedback is one of the best avenues for growth. So I feel like it's hard to spend so many formative pieces of feedback, I think, throughout my career, that have really helped sort of shape me and shape like a totally different person out the other side. But I would say one of the pieces of feedback that I got that had quite surprised me and come from left field a little bit was a little bit more recent. I actually had an outreach from somebody from a long time ago. I think maybe like 12, 13 years ago, I was working in an agency, and there was, I was also at university, and there was someone in my class who was doing a really great job on some of their web interaction assignments or something. And I recommended them for an internship at our agency, even though we didn't do that. And I just said, hey, how about we create a thing? And this person could be the first one. And this person came and worked for the agency for, I think, a year while I was there, and then another year or two after. And then they left. And instead of being a designer, they chose to become an engineer. And then they chose to leave the industry completely. And I remember thinking for all these years, oh my God, like I totally led that person astray. That was such a terrible thing that I must have done, like recommending this internship and putting their life on this path. And they actually reached out to me just a month or two ago and said they're back in design and they're back in the industry. And they said that that internship and that experience was one of the most formative experiences of their life, and that if I hadn't have done that, they wouldn't have been on the track that they are. And it was one of those weird moments where someone says that was the most important thing that anyone's done for me in my career. But for me at the time, it was like a small, tiny thing that I did. So I think the lesson from it is sometimes you do things and they're not big things to you, but they make a huge opportunity for somebody else. And I think that's outsized. The more you develop as a leader and the more influence you have, it's more and more outsized. How a tiny, tiny thing for you as a leader can become this massive ripple effect for somebody else's life, career, and the potential for their future. So I think that was just a moment of like, wow, how how amazing that after 12 years of thinking maybe I led someone astray, to have that circle back and reaffirm the fact that small things become big things.
Yeah, that's an amazing lesson, but also an amazing experience. So I'm going to leave the script and ask a different question. Is there someone in your sort of, life, your career, that whether it's 5 years, 10 years, whatever, 15 years, is there someone that you should maybe follow the lead of that person and go and reach out to them and say, hey, person, thanks so much for X. Is there anyone like that in your past that you might now go and reach out to?
100%. And I actually have for a few. After that, I was a little bit motivated to make sure that I'd circled back with some of my major influences, but definitely designers that I worked with early in my career. Some of them spent a lot of time with me, like really helping me develop my design eye and painstakingly helping me understand what makes good design and what makes bad design. And when I look back on that, I think, wow, that might have been a really thankless task. And I need to make sure that person knows that it made a big difference and that I still use their rules that they gave me all that time ago, and I still teach them to other people. So there's like this apprenticeship sort of moment in a design career where you get to pass on the learnings that you got from someone who taught you. So yeah, I think there's a important gratitude moment in there as well for people who've helped you out in your career, and then paying it forward to others to make sure like, hey, we've got to keep doing that, because that's what makes an industry supportive and sort of open to new and exciting talent.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing. I shudder to think for those people and all the great stuff they gave me, and the pain in the ass I must have been.
Yep. That's the experience.
And so if we sort of keep our mind back to that young Laura, what advice would you give to her?
I think earlier in my career, I probably thought I couldn't share, or I didn't have valid experience or valid knowledge. I probably had a fear for a while that, like I can't teach somebody else, or I can't mentor someone else because I haven't met a certain benchmark in my mind, or I don't have a certain title or a certain experience. And it's so wild, because I tell people all the time now, amazingly, I'm going to bring this back to the mentorship program. I know that the mentorship program is looking for mentors right now. So, shout out, make sure you sign up if you are keen. There's a lot of people I've talked to, even in the past few weeks, who've said, oh, maybe I don't have enough experience to mentor someone else. Maybe I don't have enough knowledge. And I think advice I'd give myself earlier in my career is your experience and your knowledge, even a few years in, is valid and would really help somebody else who's earlier in their journey. But it doesn't feel valid sometimes, because you might measure yourself against a different benchmark.
Yeah, for sure. Great advice. And let's, stick on this idea of kind of paying it forward, which is come up a little bit in the questions. Actually, no, that doesn't make any sense. Take two.
It was such a good segue into.
It felt like a good segue until I went to say the question. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense even to me. We've only got 2 questions left, so we're doing well.
Pretty well, really.
We've only done 2 take 2s, and they've all been me. So this whole setup we did about, don't worry, we can re-record the question, was really just me realizing that I would need it.
It's hard to be a host. You've got to do all the nifty segues, and you have to think on your feet about what I've just said. Whereas I know roughly what you're going to say now.
Okay, let's go again. Take 2. Okay, let's get into the hard questions now. Last 2 are the hard, the deep ones. So from your experience, from all those books that you've read, from the mentorship that you've had, and those that you've mentored, out of all of that, what is good design in your mind?
Oh, they're really hard ones. I think there's hallmarks of good design. So one of the hallmarks I'd say is generally good design tends to be quite timeless. And that's true, like extrapolating design away from product design and looking at it as design more broadly. So industrial design or architecture or interior design. So that timelessness, I think, is a key pillar of really good design. I should be able to pick up something from the 80s and not completely laugh at it, but respect like its form factor and things like that. Really good design does stand that test of time. Whereas, sometimes you pick up something from the 80s and it's hilarious. The other thing I'd say is good design is highly intentional. So it doesn't ever happen by accident. It always happens through that highly intentional practice of stripping things away and simplifying and making more and more elegant. And then I'd also say if there's something that shows me that thought has gone into tiny details, I will tend to trust the bigger details that I can't see, just because I'm like, wow, you really went all out down to that little tiny detail. This is a bit of a weird example, but I bought a new Xbox like a week ago, and I was unboxing it. And one of the things I noticed was on the bottom of the console, there was a little line that says, like in tiny text, that says "Hello from Seattle." And I had this moment of, wow, that's such a tiny detail, but I found that so delightful, just that little tiny thing. And it was embossed in all nicely. It was part of the sort of core of the machine. So I definitely say there's this intentionality and there's this attention to detail that's core to really good design, that's really foundational.
And the timelessness, let's pick up on that. Do you have any products? Is there anything that you really value and hold up as like timeless design?
Oh. I think some of the really early Apple computers, I still look at them and like there's this one that's kind of like a big, I don't remember what they called it at the time because I never owned one. But it was kind of the screen and then this really big circle back that came out of it that was colored.
The iMac of a certain generation.
Yeah. And I think that's really funny because I see that sometimes in old TV shows and everything. And I think, wow, that's still pretty cool. Like, it's not something you would buy today because the form factors of machines have changed so much that it would just be way too impractical. But it was still one of those things that kind of holds up as like, that's pretty good, pretty reasonable approach. I'd also look at really old cars. So there's a lot of, this is like another like tangent, but anyone who knows me really well will know I own a Fiat. I used to own 2 Fiats, and I really, really like Italian cars. And one of the amazing things about the Fiat 500 as a vehicle is it hasn't changed that much since the 60s. So it's pretty amazing that this form factor from the 60s is still basically what the Fiat 500 of 2023 is. And obviously the engines and everything have changed pretty dramatically, but that's a hallmark of really good design. The fact that it hasn't had to change dramatically. It's evolved, but it hasn't had that revolution. Whereas if you look at other cars, form factors have totally changed, and design of cars has totally changed over that time. But there's some really, really amazing and beautiful classic cars that you can look at today, that people lovingly restore. And some of them are like terrible, hideous cars, muscle cars. But some of them are so beautifully detailed and so beautifully kept over all that time. So I think there's a lot of timelessness in automotive design as well.
Awesome. Love it. Fiats. I grew up with French cars, not Italian cars.
What's
Peugeots.
French? Oh, Peugeot. Is there any other French car brands?
No idea. My dad was huge into Peugeots for some reason, and Fiats as well, but we didn't have any Fiats. We had Peugeots. My first car was a Peugeot, Pooh Brown.
My dad had a Fiat when he was like 18 years old, I think. And he used to tell me this story of how he would drive around with a box of bits in the back of the car. And then I think I must have been like 23 or 24 when I bought my first Fiat. And I remember he was so against it. He was like, you can't, because you can't drive around with a box of bits. And I was like, I think they're a bit more reliable now. And sure enough, it never broke down. But it was really funny to think that, you know, people back then would love cars so much that they didn't care that they wouldn't get them from A to B.
I'm going to assume no, but I was going to ask, do you now have a box of bits in the back of your car?
No, I do have a box of assorted things from hardware stores, like sanding belts, paintbrushes, because usually we go to the hardware store, we put a bunch of stuff in the car, and then it stays there until we use it, which might be a month later. So I do have a box of bits, but they're not bits for the car. They're usually bits for the house.
Right. And then so the second order then is whether or not, you know, the reliability of your car. First order is, you know, do you have a box of bits in the boot? The second is, are you on first name basis with a mechanic?
No.
Okay, well, it's a reliable car then. It's doing well.
I think that's a really good indicator though in the future.
Awesome. So last question, and we're sticking with the hard ones. What are some of the challenges that you face specifically as a woman in tech?
Ooh, I think there's all the classic ones where if you're in an industry that has a like traditionally male, we're gonna need to go back. This is my take.
Yes,
too.
I'm happy about that though. At least
I almost said predominantly, then I said traditional, then I got really confused with where I was. We're going take two. Okay.
Take two.
I don't think we need to repeat your question. I think there's enough space between my Yep. Okay. It's really hard to start from nothing though. Can you do like a fake, you know, like this won't be the real one because your real one was really good, but just go again. Don't
use this one. But the question is, what are some of the challenges that you face specifically as a woman in tech?
I think it's really difficult to come into an industry that doesn't have a completely equal footing of male versus female, for instance, or even expanding away from being more gendered, like looking more holistically at different levels of diversity as well in ethnicity and different beliefs, different philosophies on, or even how we interact and do things as humans. I'd say specifically as a female, some of the challenges I've probably faced are the classic ones, right? So especially working in engineering teams as a single female designer, and then you'll have an engineering team which might be predominantly male, and they'll do things like they might play Counter-Strike on Fridays on their computers, which is a real story. A bunch of engineers I used to work with did that, and they don't invite you if you're a female, even if you like playing Counter-Strike, which I do not, but I do play other games. But it's funny because you kind of get excluded just because they assume that you might not be interested. So I think some of the challenges are around the assumption of who you are in the team and what your gender sort of brings with you as a sense of like what you might get invited to or not invited to. But I also think that there's a lot of challenges around the different dynamics of, you know, like, will someone take me seriously if I do this? Or all those questions you ask yourself about, you know, how would I do this if I had a different level of confidence, or if I presented myself in a different way. But I'd also say there's some benefits and some different philosophies that you might have as a female, or even just coming from a more diverse background, that you bring to your work that's kind of essential and kind of needs to be in the work environment. And there's some things that I've learned about, like, instead of being in a management or leadership role, instead of trying to pretend that you're something you're not, embrace what makes you you. And like, I tend to bring more, maybe more nurturing and more emotional intelligence into my roles than maybe some of my male colleagues might. Not everyone's going to be the same, obviously, but that's something that makes me more me and leans me into my gender a little bit more. And I see that as a strength now rather than a weakness. But I think over time that's changed as well, where you kind of feel like you have to act a certain way or fit a certain archetype, and learning how to succeed on your own terms in a way that's authentic to you is kind of the really big challenge to get around.
Awesome. And thank you for bringing the authentic Laura to Atlassian.
No, wait, go back. Your mouth was moving, but no sound was happening.
Damn it. And shit, now I can't start it again. And so thank you for bringing the authentic Laura to Atlassian. It has been awesome to have you on the team for a couple of years now. And also it's been great to get to interview you and get to have this conversation. And I'm sure the audience is going to get a lot from it. Not just entertainment and enjoyment, but insight into you and some knowledge. So that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, and hello to everyone watching. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Any final words from you?
No, thanks for watching. Hope you learned some valuable lessons about French and Italian cars, and or assorted snippets of architecture, interior design, and other things we may have covered today.
Fantastic. See you all later. Bye.